Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. I am super excited today to introduce you to our guest, Marquita Davis, who is the Chief Academic Officer of KinderCare. So an organization that's been around for, I think, more than 50 years. It's been around for a long time, established, talk about doing good work in the world. So Marquita, thank you for being here with us. Welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's a delight. So tell us a little bit about how did you come to be doing this work in the world? And tell for people who don't know, what is KinderCare?
Great. I'll start with KinderCare. How about that?
Excellent.
KinderCare is a organization that provides early childhood care and education for children from 6 weeks to 12 years old. And we provide it in what we would call traditional center care. We also have before and after care in the center care, and we have a wonderful, thriving aftercare program for school-age children. We have great connections with companies and businesses that run their own childcare on sites, as well as universities. So that's a little bit about KinderCare.
Awesome. Well, so how did you become involved with this organization? How long have you been?
I've been with KinderCare 18 months. How about that?
Okay.
Long tenure. A long tenure. But I've been in the early childhood field for almost 30 years. I know I look really young, but been working in this space for 30 years. Prior to coming to KinderCare, I was at the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation, where I ran the early childhood program there at the foundation, and have done some great work in Alabama, and so Head Start and pre-K work there as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. So it's always for you on some way or another about identifying the preciousness of these young people and helping them reach their potential.
Yes, it is.
I get that. I feel that. I had a beautiful opportunity many years ago when I was raising kids actively, when my kids were younger, I had a nanny who was working for me whose daughter ended up on a scholarship with the Gates Foundation. Ended up with 10 years of college. And
yeah.
A kid who was raised in my house it's really cool. So
yeah.
Beautiful work. So here we are talking to parents of what we like to call complex kids and all of the professionals who support them. Let's turn the attention to what do you think is important based on your work in preventive care and early intervention, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your wealth of experience across the lifespan for children. What's important for parents to understand that we should be talking about today?
Well, it's interesting because I know that a lot of your work centers on supports for parents. Yeah. And so when you look at the research and you look at the data, there's lots of good information about how early learning settings or school settings should support children with exceptionalities. Mm-hmm. Often what's missing are those real conversations about also how to support parents. And right. So while we think about how we show up in space for young children, which is the first line, right? That's what you really want to do. We understand that parents are their first teachers, and that if we want to balance in this equation, we also especially with complex children, children in general, but especially with complex children, have to think about the mental health supports or just the overall supports through education and knowledge building that we also have to provide for families.
Yeah.
And KinderCare is unique in that we serve all children, regardless of their exceptionality. And we also pay very close attention to supports for families. We want to empower families. We want families to understand that they're a child's first teacher. We want to give them the tools that they need as they transition into a more traditional setting, a K-12 setting. And so we try to balance how we support families.
So talk about that. I love that notion. That's beautiful language that parents are a child's first teachers. And what occurs to me as I'm hearing it come out loud, right, is parents are ongoing a child's teacher, always. And sometimes where parents get stuck is too busy trying to be the teacher and not being the parent.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. Do you remember when you were younger and your mother may have said to you, I'm not your best friend, I'm your parent.
Right.
And the thing is this, if you have your child in a quality learning setting, and in our case, a quality early learning setting,
Right.
you recognize that it's a partnership. The responsibility doesn't just rest on the parent being everything, but the parent partnering, right, with the provider, the caretaker, the individual that is supporting this child through long hours of the day in many instances. And so it really should be a partnership, regardless of the exceptionality of the child. It should be a partnership, and a parent has to understand they don't have to go it alone. And one other thing I'd like to say, because I think it's important, and parents should also understand that they have the right to advocate, to ask questions, and to be engaged.
Yeah. So many things in that. There's so many directions we could go with that, with those statements, because there is in our population, the right to advocacy is a big issue. Feeling entitled to partnership can be a big issue.
Yeah.
So what I was originally thinking about was that teachable moments are important and they're not everything. We have to be careful not to overteach the teachable moments. But I love this conversation about how do we figure out how to be in partnership, particularly when we've got kids who we're all still trying to figure out and understand. Some kids, they follow the metrics and they're easier to educate than others.
That's correct. That's
right.
correct.
But when the school hasn't quite figured it out, and we haven't quite figured it out, and maybe the doctors haven't quite figured it out, like that, it adds this other dimension, right?
Yeah. Elaine, you said something really important that I think in some ways answers what you're saying as well. You named a whole host of individuals that are part of this kind of responsiveness to a child, the school, before that, the early learning setting, the teacher, the parent, the pediatrician. And that to me is an example of understanding that we don't go it alone, right?
Right.
The intention is not to go it alone. And so there's so much to learn when your child is in a setting. So what it does require, I think, is a lot of vulnerability from a parent and the ability to give over some ownership. And what I mean by that is not that you own the person, but the experiences of that child. So when you go into an early learning setting and you have a provider that is spending hours with your child and may recognize some things that you don't necessarily recognize. And one, it doesn't make you a bad parent, doesn't make you a parent that's not informed, but they spend a lot of time with providers. It's important to listen. And what we do tend to find is when you're working with a family and you may notice some things with a child and you say to a mom and a dad, here's what I'm noticing. Often parents are like, what do you mean? I'm with them all the time. I did not notice that. And I also recognize that it is about building trust with that provider. So building trust with that provider, listening to them, And then being able to assess with your husband or wife or partner and your pediatrician whether, in fact, these things that your provider has noticed are real things. And
Yeah.
so often it's the first line of defense. Often it's the first time that someone trained in early childhood, a teacher, a paraprofessional, may notice and bring to the attention of families. And it's important to build trust so the families then can rely on what you said. And even if they're a little hesitant, can at least talk to a trusted pediatrician or discuss it or look for it at home.
So as I'm hearing you talking, I am flashing back to my eldest child, who is now almost 30, at 2 years old.
Wow.
So very early parent-teacher conference, the first of many conversations. This one was about, I don't know, not using scissors properly or whatever it was. But the first time I heard a provider raising concerns, right?
Yeah.
And my job, as you say, was to listen and to hear and to explore. And what's jumping at me right now, Marquita, is now this is going back 30 years, so the world's very different now than it was.
Yeah.
How many years it took before I felt like I got the professionals in my world to take my perspective seriously and to listen and to understand. And so after those first years, I was the one that I felt like I was trying to get the providers to understand that there was something else going on here. And so it goes both ways. It's like,
It does.
There's that falling into trust, falling out of trust, dancing around trust, that we have to learn to trust each other.
Yes. It's interesting as you were talking, I know it was 30 years ago. And one of the things that we do at KinderCare is we provide a developmental screener. It's called Brigance, and we provide this.
Say that again.
Brigance.
Brigance.
It's
developmental
a developmental screener.
Okay.
And so as you were talking about your 2-year-old child and the teacher saying, oh, they're not cutting. I'm going to use that as an example because it's a gross motor skill, a fine motor skill.
Right.
They noticed it through interactions. And now what's in place and what also can empower parents are actual tools, norm reference tools that then you, Elaine, young mother, 30 years ago, could be able to say, or if it were now, you would be able to say, listen, I have this assessment that was done with my child. It identifies that they are delayed, Mr. Pediatrician. I do not care what you say. Here is the data in support of that. And then the pediatrician perhaps would listen. But to your larger point about the reciprocity and the trust base of these relationships, that's why it's so imperative that when families are going into providers, that they develop a relationship for the benefit of that child. Yeah. That's really important. It is more than just, did the child blow their nose today? Or even the parent saying, right, to the provider, I noticed Johnny moving back and forth a lot. Have you noticed that? It's to your earlier point. And so there is this relationship between the two in support of the child. And often it is when the child is the youngest when we see these exceptionalities. And we have to fight for the rights of our children, often when they go into the public school space. But at least in that early learning space, we can prepare families for that journey into the public school space.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take a quick break and then we're going to come back and see where this conversation takes us. Hi, it's Elaine. And if you like this podcast, you'll love our coach approach. Whether you're a parent looking for support or a professional supporting families, we invite you to download a free guide with 12 key coaching tools at impactparents.com/gift. You can begin using a coach approach to help kids become more independent or improve all of your conversations at work and at home. That's impactparents.com/gift. Welcome back, everybody. My guest is Marquita Davis. She is the KinderCare academic lead. I lost the name of it, but the head of academics for KinderCare. And we've been talking about the partnership between parents and providers, parents and schools, about how important it is for it from an early intervention place to begin. And I think what's coming to me is how important it is for us as parents to really think about the team that we are putting together in support of our kids. And, we know that line, it takes a village, and that village has leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the team of providers, pediatricians, educators, after school care. That's the babysitters, the tutors, that's the team.
Yeah.
And we are part of it.
Absolutely. But parents are the leaders. They're the coaches of the team, and they get to make the calls for the plays. But there are lots of people behind the scenes that are influencing those calls. Not to get too theory heavy, but there's a wonderful theory out called an ecological theory. It's by Yuri Brofenbrenner. And I love it because at the center of the theory is the child. And then there are all these systems, like a solar system, that all wrap around the child in support of that child. And that's what you have talked about today. I do want to go back real quick and say something about the leaders of the team, the coaches of the team, because raising a child with exceptionalities or just children in general can be highly stressful.
Yeah.
It is as equally important for parents to make sure that they take care of themselves, to be the best advocate, the best parent, the best human being for your child means that you feel absolutely no guilt or shame in taking care of yourself, because that's how you're going to show up for your child, because it can be exhausting.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important also to go back to that, because that's how the leader of the team will be able to go into each and every situation with some sense of determination, resilience, and perseverance.
Yeah. We always say, we've been saying this from the beginning, if you don't know where to focus, lean into relationship and pay attention to self-care.
Oh, absolutely. I think
And
that's
we hear
lovely.
from parents all the time, my kid's the one with the challenge. Why should I be focusing on myself?
Oh,
I mean, that is the number one. We've done a lot of
isn't that
research. Why don't parents
interesting?
ask for help? Why don't they take help? Because parent training for kids with ADHD and executive function challenges, autism, anxiety, parent training is the number one recommended treatment other than medication.
I
And
love that.
less than 30% of kids even get referrals to parent training. Less than 30% of
30% of parents.
right, even get the referral, much less participate. And then of that 30%, significantly smaller percentage actually pursue it. So there's this contradiction here between what you're saying, which is that we've got to take care of ourselves. And what the medical community is saying is this is recommended treatment. And then the story that parents have about it themselves, which is, I shouldn't need this. I don't deserve
And you shouldn't
this.
ask for this
I
help.
shouldn't ask for it.
Because we should be Marvel characters,
Right.
Superman and Superwoman.
Yeah.
And that there is, in some ways, we martyr ourselves
Yes.
when we don't have to. And even in the setting, like a KinderCare setting, we take this very seriously. We want to support parents. We support our teachers when they call in to inclusion services in support of children in their classrooms. What do? I have this issue. How do I help them? We always ask them, what can we do for you? How can we support you as well? In an airplane, they tell the parent to put their mask on first.
Yeah. And yet we fight it, don't we? It's fascinating to me.
It is fascinating. I think it's culture, belief system. If for any minute if you take your foot off the gas, then you might miss an opportunity to help your child. And it goes back to, you're not doing this alone.
Yeah.
You're not doing this alone. You shouldn't have to do it alone. And if you're in a quality setting, a quality learning setting, because that's the space that I'm in,
Right.
then you will not have to do it alone.
So part of me wants to go to the question I was thinking I really wanted to ask you, which is from your wealth of experience, what are some of the messages that help parents embrace this philosophy? And then there's this other nagging question that I want to ask. What's your recommendation for parents who don't find themselves in what they would see as a quality experience? So they're kind of two different directions.
Yeah, they're divergent questions. So
Yeah.
you know what, Elaine, I don't know the answer to the first question because we can talk about the science, just like you said earlier, right? We can talk about the data, and we can encourage families parents in particular, to not go it alone. I would say that if you are in a quality setting, quality early learning setting, then you have a teacher or a center director who is saying to you, no, you don't have to do this alone. Here we are. Here are the resources. Here's how we're going to support you. Here's how we're going to help you. My hope is that parents will listen and trust and think about what's best for their family in support of their child. As far as,
Can I
go
just
ahead.
speak to that real quick? And
Absolutely.
I just to go the other, but because here's what jumped out at me is I've had many conversations with school superintendents over the years who have said, my mandate is the child, not the parent. So there are
I'm
some
sorry, I didn't mean
settings,
to laugh out
but
loud.
they don't have funding for it, right? So you're in a setting where we're looking at the whole health of the child in KinderCare. But you don't necessarily get that when you get into the public school system, certainly in our country.
That's the great thing about an early learning experience, a quality early learning experience. That can be part of your story.
Yeah.
And the whole child is never devoid of their family.
Right.
The wholeness of the child is, in fact, their family. And so if we want children to have everything that they need in absence of their parent, that's like educational malpractice. One cannot happen without the other. And it doesn't require money to say to a parent, you know what? There is the United Way down the way has some mental health supports for families.
Right.
Take this number or call so and so. I think maybe you need that. That just takes someone who understands that the care of the child begins with their parents.
The care of the child begins with
their parents.
Yeah. So I interrupted you. You were going a different
Okay,
direction.
so the convergent question was, can you repeat it?
So there was this, I think you spoke to both of them in a way. There was, how do I deal with it if I'm not in a quality, in what I experience as a quality environment?
Wow.
And that's happening when kids, especially older.
Yeah. Okay. So listen, I understand the realities of the world. 51% of children are not in any type of care. And so we have those children that are in care, and whether they are kith and kin, big mama's house, or a setting like KinderCare, all of this is about advocating, having voice, and asking for what you want. Yeah. And so that, Elaine, goes back to the other thing that you talked about earlier. There's a whole training that has to happen for parents to be able to say, even in settings that are not like a KinderCare, hey, Miss Susie, I love that you love my child. This is what I've noticed. Have you noticed it?
Yeah.
Right? Have you noticed it? And so I know that in a perfect situation, that doesn't happen in a perfect situation it would happen all the time, but I understand that it doesn't. And the only way that I can respond to that is, again, pushing the parent to show up and ask the questions and develop the relationship with a provider, whoever that provider is.
So many things are coming up as you're saying this, and I'll put some notes, some resources in the show notes. But this notion, we talk a lot about community and the importance of community, because when you're in community with other parents, you begin to see when your kid's an outlier. You begin to see
Yeah.
when your kid, when what other parents are getting in terms of supports that your kids may not be getting. You like being in community with other parents allows you perspective and insight as well. And
Elaine, how do you get people in community? I mean, you posed a beautiful question to me as it relates to early childhood and education. And since that's part of the work that you do, how do you get people in community?
I think the answer there are two answers. One is we struggle with it because there's a lot of resistance. We've done a lot of research. Every few years, we do research to try to figure out what are parents seeking and what is making it so hard for them to step in and get the help they need. We make a ton of it available for free. And we call ourselves a private sector business for the public good. And we try to do everything we can afford to do for free so that there's no barrier for access that way. But it's a tall order. I mean, what we're talking about is a complex issue. There's so many dynamics involved, and we haven't even talked about when the parents have complex issues themselves.
Oh,
right.
We haven't talked about that. I used to run Head Start. And so even in my Head Start days, we would see a lot of that trauma-informed care, trauma for families. I will say though, Elaine, that often in the private childcare space, like a KinderCare, we also recognize that families have trauma.
Yeah.
And it isn't necessarily based on income. It is lived experiences, right?
Very much not based on income.
Absolutely not. But there are often those who think that is the only parents who have those income-based issues live through traumatic events. And that is not the case at all.
Not
And
at all.
so
Well, and in our community, in fact, what we're beginning to see is some research coming out that the evidence around the trauma that happens for these kids when their learning issues, their developmental challenges are not diagnosed and treated.
Oh, yes.
Creates its own medical trauma of not being identified and not being properly supported. But it's another podcast conversation.
You have to invite me back for the next one.
I'd love it. So we do need to start wrapping up this conversation.
Okay.
How can people find out more about you and the resources available at KinderCare?
Well, you can always hit me up on LinkedIn and also kindercare.com.
Awesome. Let's keep it easy.
Yeah.
And we will put all of this in the show notes, everybody, and as well as some resources based on this conversation. I'll pull some links of other podcasts and some articles and some pieces that I think would be supportive of this conversation. Great. So I'm sad to say we do have to start wrapping it up because I've loved it. Tell us, is there anything we haven't talked about that you really want to make sure you share with parents today, or something else maybe that you want to come back and highlight?
I will say that I'm actually really lucky as a professional to have worked in spaces where children and their families are a priority. At KinderCare, we believe that. We believe in the wholeness of a child, which includes their families. And I understand that there are places where that isn't the case. I would say to families seeking care that every environment isn't the right environment for your child. Least restrictive environments matter, and where your child can blossom and grow, have a loving, caring adult who understands early childhood, who cares about you as an individual and your child is important. And I think that if you have and I use this word lightly, luxury or ability to find a setting like a KinderCare, I would strongly suggest that you do.
Yeah, I feel that. I remember having debates with my husband in the early years of our marriage about if we had to choose public school versus private school, right? If public school wasn't an option or private school was an option, like where was it most important to get the most comprehensive care? And what I'm hearing you saying is back to early childhood development, what happens in those first handful of years is really
Yes.
powerful and really important.
There, you said it best. I mean, we can leave now.
Thank you for what you're doing in the world, for the beautiful
Thank
energy that
you.
you bring to it. It's been a pleasure to
Thank
get to know
you.
you.
And you as well.
Before we wrap, we always like to ask, do you have a favorite quote or motto that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I always say to people when I leave them and sign off, be good to yourself. So be good to yourself, Elaine.
Beautiful. I love that. I might take that one forward with me. Be good to yourself. Thank you again for being here.
You're
and
welcome.
To those of you listening, thank you for what you're doing for yourself and for your kids. Take a moment. Think about the conversation that we've just been having for the last half hour. What are the insights you're taking from today? What messages stood out to you? What do you want to take forward with you into your week? And it may be that you end with this final message of be good to yourself, or it may be something else we talked about earlier in the conversation. But what's the awareness or the insight you have now that you didn't have half an hour ago that you want to bring with you into your relationships with your family, with your caregivers, with your providers, and with your kids? And it's always remember that your role matters. What you do and how you be with these kids, it matters a lot. At the end of the day, you make an enormous difference. Take care, everybody. See you on the next one.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/sanityschool.